frightened, alone, vulnerable.
Not talking about it and dealing with it is like putting a Band-Aid on a boil. It's out of sight, but it just festers.
You didn't really have time to draw breath and look back on what had happened to you, but it was always there, looming over your shoulder.
This is now between grown-ups that were once children. I left with a white rabbit, so I did feel like Alice falling down a hole.
I'm Andrew Rule, this is Life and Crimes. Today we're going to have a very serious conversation with a very serious woman. Her name is Marita Murphy. Her name before she was married was Marita Elliott. Marita, as she will tell us, was the victim of a very serious crime when she was a child. She has recently, very bravely and probably very wisely, I hope, shot a documentary about her predicament, because she's a victim who cannot get justice or satisfaction through the law, which often happens in sexual assault cases. Her documentary is called You Be the Judge, and I commend Marita for doing that. It probably took a lot of nerve, it probably took a lot of time, and undoubtedly it took quite a bit of money, it's never easy, but she did it, and it has brought her plight and that of many others into focus. We welcome you. You're talking from your home in rural Victoria.
Hello, Andrew.
And we'd like to just, for the benefit of our listeners on Life and Crimes, discuss with you what happened from the start. And that's a long time ago, at 50 odd years. You were born and raised in a small settlement just outside Melbourne, and it was there in July of 1968 that two things happened. One was that you turned 7, and the other one was that your father died. I think you were one of a very large family, and that your father's death was a shocking and traumatic event, not only for you, the youngest child, but for your older brothers and sisters, but especially for your mother, who I think you have told us in the past had 7 children, but 12 pregnancies. So she'd had a very tough life, only to be confronted with becoming a widow with all these children to support. Take us back to that time and place and describe where it was and what happened next.
So Dad had been unwell on a disabled pension with a brain tumour, and he actually passed away when I was 6. So for my 7th birthday, it was very traumatic for the whole family, and then Mum became unwell, and her mum, Gran, was home with us when Mum was in hospital in the summer holidays of 1968, and Mum had been an only child, and I've done the maths now and understand that Gran was 84 to my 7.
And so Gran really couldn't really be expected to look after you. Okay.
No.
So your mother has to go to hospital?
Yes.
She had something very serious wrong. She needed a serious operation and she needed to recuperate afterwards. This meant that you and some of the other children who are a little bit older than you had to be farmed out to various people, you know, whether relatives, friends or members of sort of the Catholic network. Tell us just briefly what happened and what didn't happen. You were supposed to go to one place and didn't go to one place.
My honorary auntie and my /godmother was coming to get me. I knew where she lived in her family, and I'd been to her home. But there was a change in plans, and another family came, and a big car pulled up, and I can remember it very clearly. A woman got out, and she had 3 youths with her. And I understand this is your gut instinct, that I felt apprehensive and didn't want to go, but I had no control over the situation, and it escalated very quickly to a bad situation for me, and I had no options.
Your instincts were fairly high.
Yes.
Your instinct was, I don't want to go with these people. You were surprised to see three youths, or,
Yes.
a couple of teenagers and a younger one, get out of the car
Yes.
because you hadn't known that that was the case.
No, not at all.
And it didn't fill you with joy, it filled you with some sort of apprehension.
Absolutely. You know, I've always told the children not to ignore their gut instinct because it doesn't let you down.
And you sort of clung to your grandmother's legs or skirt, but in the end, you had to go, and that was that, and away you went.
Exactly.
With this woman that we will call the Good Samaritan, because we won't name her for legal reasons. Not because of her, because she is now dead, but because of her sons. Two of the three youths were her sons, weren't they? The third one was not her son. The third one did not look like the others, and that third one, it transpires, was in fact a young fellow who'd been brought up in orphanages and boys' homes and had in fact been a sort of a multiple offender who'd escaped at least twice from state-run boys' homes. Is that right?
He was a ward of the state, a juvenile delinquent, and I found in his own words online that his criminal life started at 14, so I know what he was doing.
His criminal life started the very year that
Yes.
you were exposed to him. So
Yes.
you're a 7-year-old girl. Your
Yes.
dad's died. You're traumatised because your father's died. Your mother was in a potentially life-threatening situation in hospital where she could have died from blood loss. You've been handed to a family of strangers, although, to be fair, they were known to the family in the sense that the priest that had married your parents, these people were related to him. That was the
Yes.
connection.
The Catholic connection.
But you didn't know them personally.
Never met them before, never been to the home.
And so you get to the home. This is in a Bayside suburb of Melbourne. It's more than an hour from where you lived, near Tynong. You go to this house, and there is Mrs. Good Samaritan and these three youths. And at dinner time, in comes the father of the family. You have dinner all together. You are fairly apprehensive, nervous. And that night, you're put to bed in a bedroom which you would probably one of her own daughter's bedrooms, but the daughters weren't home. Is that right?
Yes.
What happened on that first night in the House of the Good Samaritans?
She put me to bed with a radio on and turned off the light.
Yep.
And the offender came into my room and put his hand over my mouth.
Did you know who it was? You didn't think it was the father of the family?
No, I knew exactly who it was. It was a foster child that was staying with the family.
And when we say the foster child, now this is what, a 14-year-old
juvenile delinquent.
As you've since understood it, he'd run away from state-run institutions like Tirana or other boys' homes.
Yes.
At least twice.
Yes, he was the only one. He was the only one in 1968 that appeared on the escapees list, absconders list on 2 occasions.
An absconder. So, and he'd been raised in state institutions pretty well most of his life. Okay, so he's a pretty hard case. Whether it's his fault or not, the fact is what we had here was a pretty hard case and a repeat offender and a repeat escaper. And here he is in the Good Samaritan's home, because the Good Samaritan loves being kind and generous and Christian. And you know exactly who it is when this person comes into your room. How is that? Could you tell by the outline of his face or what?
I've always known, and I can't tell you how.
That's quite understandable. We usually can tell those things.
It's not a repressed memory. I've always known.
And what happened? Be frank without upsetting yourself.
Well, his first action was to cover my mouth with his hand, and obviously, as an adult looking back to a child, that would have been very frightening. Yeah. He then sexually molested me. The police wanted to know for how long. I can't answer that.
No.
I was probably frozen and terrified, and I didn't say anything the next morning.
So this went on for whatever time. Eventually he leaves the room.
Yes.
Eventually you fall asleep, an uneasy sleep, I guess, frightened, alone, vulnerable. You get up next morning.
When I woke up, the radio was on and the woman went cross at me. So she came in and the radio was on and she went cross at me.
Okay. And then what happened?
I was digitally raped in the backyard by her oldest son, and he discussed. He used the terminology poke, and it's always been like a shocking word to me, I guess.
Yep.
Because I didn't know what digital rape was, and it hurt. It was very confronting. I knew rude was wrong. And he was saying where babies come from and did I want a baby, like talking dirty. I had no idea what he was. It took a very, very long time to join the dots in my own head as to what had happened and what had transpired.
Right. So that happened in the backyard in the first
Yeah.
24 hours or something?
No, the first few days. I can't clarify.
So these boys or boy has removed your trousers?
Yes.
Do you wonder if, looking back on it, and maybe I'm just a suspicious creature, but do you think the Good Samaritan mother put you in trousers for a reason, to make it harder for...
I'd never had that thought. What I had the thought of was she... I had two thoughts. One is the first rule of helping is to do no harm. So like, an ambulance on its way to an accident maiming and killing people. The other one was I didn't know for a very long time if she had daughters, so I didn't know if she realised the danger that she put me in. But now as an adult myself and a mother, a very cautious mother, I'm bewildered as to why she even took me.
That's a very good point, and I think it's well made. She might have been well-intentioned, but she was naive, stupid and...
Oh, absolutely.
Criminally careless, probably.
Absolutely. She was the adult in charge, and she just sent me with 3 youths every day.
Basically let you just run around with... It's just not suitable.
Who does that?
So twice in a matter of days you've been assaulted?
Yes.
Basically, what was the next instance that stands out in your memory of this repeated assault?
So after the first night sexual molestation in my bed and the digital rape in the backyard, it was a gang rape under a bridge.
And how did that come about?
We were sent to the beach on bikes, and I was happy. I liked the beach, and I wasn't particularly frightened of older boys because I had 5 older brothers. So I guess I was kind of trusting and not frightened as such. And
despite what had happened?
Well, I can't really answer that. I don't know.
No.
I had no power or choice or control.
No, okay. Did they have a little bike for you to ride, or do you think?
No, they had 3 bikes, and I was put on the back of a bike.
And which was it? One of the brothers that rode the other one, or?
I can't tell you. There was 3 youths, 3 bikes, and we were supposedly going to the beach, and they were talking and looking for a place to go to be private, and they found a big bonfire on a vacant block, and they were going to get inside and underneath.
When you say a big bonfire, you mean a pile of brush and...
A big
wood.
pile that hadn't been lit.
Okay, that's right.
So where they were discussing they were going to take me was for privacy and what they had planned.
So there was a plot here. There was planning.
Yes, they discussed that in front of me.
It's a conspiracy.
Yes, they discussed that in front of me, and I told them when I reported, I clarified this, and they were going to go in underneath this big pile, and there was nobody around. It seemed like a safe place, and a man appeared from nowhere with a can of accelerant and doused the pile and set it alight. And
Right.
I mean, had we been in this pile underneath, like it had like wardrobes, doors, big, it was huge. So had they have been earlier, I had always the feeling that we would have been burnt because they would have been wanting to be quiet.
But that's not what happened. What did happen?
No. So their then other plan was to take me under a bridge, and where my clothing was removed, and 2 of them, I've only not many years been calling it a gang rape, but in fact that's what it was, because the younger boy was posted as a lookout.
So the younger boy, who's, twice your size, but he's about 11, he's old enough to go to high school, more or less, and the 2 older ones who are, in those days, at an age where some people actually left high school, in about, year 9, as we now call it. Tell us what happened.
Well, I was very confused. I was very uncomfortable. I would term it now as a kidnap because I wasn't free to leave.
No.
And I just was totally powerless and embarrassed and humiliated and assaulted and seared into my brain and threatened, and despite the threats I spoke.
What were those threats and who made them?
Don't tell anyone, you'll get into trouble, and that has been the case. When I have spoken up after decades, I have got into trouble.
Right. Were you surprised now that the ringleader of this initially, the one who instigated
Yes.
the behaviour with you, was the Tirana runaway, bad guy, right? But the older brother, the bad Samaritan, let's call him, he joins in fairly enthusiastically, or what? How do you read
Well,
his...
he did the digital rape in the backyard, and then he participated in they were in cahoots.
Right, they were in cahoots.
So by that time, they'd both sexually assaulted me before we got to the point where I say there was a gang rape.
Okay. The third youth, the second brother, that is, the younger brother, what was his part in this and what was his demeanour?
He was posted as a lookout, and my brother and him shared a name, and I couldn't understand why he didn't stop them, because my brother by the same name was very kind to me. I was actually, when I was removed from the house, I was sent to a adjoining suburb of Kew or Malvern. I think it might have been... I couldn't understand why he didn't protect me or stop me, because he didn't join in. That's a confused child's thought.
Of course. Looking back on it, perhaps, and this is a reconstruction and it's speculation, I know, that 11-year-old boy might have been almost as... he wasn't assaulted, of course, and he wasn't raped, but he might have found it very disturbing himself, because
he had no power.
He had no power. They were big, strong, intimidating, 3 years older, much bigger and stronger, as happens at that age. 14-year-olds can be shaving, and 11-year-olds are still little boys often. And so...
He was actually physically quite big, and there was some confusion with me, and I wondered what my memory would be like when I did report to the police if they found these people. But he was actually physically quite big, but he had no power.
But he didn't join in and
No.
didn't look overly...
No, I accuse him of nothing. And there's been some confusion, but I want to protect him in the fact that he did nothing to me.
Right,
He just didn't stop them.
So how did this situation end up?
That I spoke at the table despite being threatened.
That night?
Yeah. Again, I won't try to clarify. I think so, but I don't completely know.
So subsequent to the assault, you end up back at the Good Samaritan's house in the Bayside suburb. There's the nightly dinner where Dad's home from work, Mum's there, the three boys and you. And it must be that you brought it up and spoke to...
Yes.
The parents, I imagine, and told them enough, certainly told them enough that they got the message and were shocked and horrified. And
absolutely.
What happened next? How did you come to go to somebody else's house? Can you remember anything about it?
I don't remember the actual trip. I just remember the relief. I left with a white rabbit, so I did feel like Alice falling down a hole. I'd taken solace in the white rabbit in the backyard, so the boys are like, oh, you like the rabbit, you have the rabbit. So when I left, I had this white rabbit called Bunty, which I returned home with.
A live rabbit?
A live white rabbit. It's just like Alice falling down a rabbit hole.
And you went to another family friend's house in Kew, which was several suburbs away, where your own brother Bill was staying.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the place probably you should have always been.
Yeah, definitely. There was lots of people that stepped up and said we would have had you. So there was definitely options.
Do you believe now that they were told?
Yes, I do. 100%.
Who do you think told who what? Do you think Mrs. Good Samaritan told somebody something?
Either her and me.
You end up back home at Maryknoll after some weeks, let's say. Your mother has come out of hospital and out of her convalescent period, for want of a better word, and she's home, you're home. Did you speak to your mother about this directly, or was she informed by the other adults?
She told me as an adult that the adults discussed it via letter writing, which is how they did things in those days. We didn't have a phone.
Okay, I understand. And so your mother was told by one of the Good Samaritans.
The person that took me and Mum exchanged letters about it.
And I suppose the terminology would be fairly euphemistic, and it would be that you'd been interfered with or something like that.
Yeah, I think she even told Mum that often a victim can get a little bit of blame. There was an insinuation there to Mum that I was a bit...
Your
it's
fault.
Just so weird.
Yeah, 7-year-old. Bizarre, but there you are. And I imagine the Good Samaritan in the first place would be a bit inclined to be blaming the Turana Boys Home bloke, which, of course,
I don't think that's unreasonable.
That's not unreasonable because he was probably the ringleader.
Yeah, but she wasn't taking responsibility herself.
No, exactly. As most people don't in those situations, looking for a scapegoat. Then what was the obvious reaction from you in your behaviour over the next X time, X years?
Anger and chip on the shoulder with society. So
yep.
I was not respectful of authority at all.
And so you rebelled. You'd gone from being a fairly quiet, fairly obedient child at 7.
Grand rebellion.
To, by the time you turn 8, you the worst one in the class, you're disruptive, you're upsetting, you get upset easily and you upset others, and you don't respect teachers and so on, or your mother. Is that right?
I would have thought a little bit older than 8. I think it was slow. I think it was a little bit slower than that. A slow build. I can remember reading the word rape and going and looking it up in the dictionary, and even then when I looked it up, I didn't join the dots. It took a while to suddenly go, oh gosh, that's what they were doing to me. So that you're not having those discussions where you're making sense of things, you're trying to work it out in your own head by yourself.
Right. So, long story short, you've become a problem child at school.
Yes.
You've told me earlier that your mother wanted you to go to Sion College in Warragul, where she'd gone to school. Back when it had been a boarding school, she'd gone there. It was no longer a boarding school, thank goodness. And so you saddled up for a year, probably was it Form 1?
Yes, would have been 1972
or something like that. Yeah, something like that. You've taken a train and a bus, or a bus and a train or whatever, to get to Warragul, long trip, to an hour a day or more travelling, each way to go to Warragul. That's not been a great result. It's a big, long, tiring day, and B, you played up and upset the teachers there. Is that right?
Very much so.
Okay. So you're acting out, as they say.
Yes.
Classic. It's a classic thing, isn't it? So
yes, it is.
You're 12 and a half, you've left school. What happens to you next?
My sister had started nursing at the Pakenham District Hospital, gone through the Alfred and ended up going to WA and doing midwifery. So she got married, and they'd been home to visit. They had a young child, and I walked out the school gate and got in their car and drove across the Nullarbor with them. It was wonderful. Over the dirt. It was still the dirt.
Oh, okay, on the Nullarbor. And what did you do over there?
Went to the swimming pool. My gran gave me the money for a dragster bike, and so we stopped in Northam and I picked out a bike, and it was excellent.
How long were you over there with Big Sister?
Probably not that long, and then I flew home and...
Flew home?
Yes, on my own. And then I worked at Mill Valley Ranch.
A big thing in those days to fly across Australia.
Yeah, no, it was life skills.
Yeah. Mill Valley Ranch, of course, is was a trail riding sort of place, or that sort of thing?
Yes, still exists. They've just had their 50th.
Oh, I think it was just on the highway there, was it? Is that right?
It's on the other side of Tynong North from the new Pakenham Racecourse.
Oh, okay. And did you used to look after horses and, feed them, groom them, look after the saddlery, the whole thing?
And wheel and deal and buy and sell.
Oh, I see. And was it a good time there?
Oh, it's fabulous. You know,
Right.
they exist today, and they're in the credits on my documentary because they were just
Good.
unjudgmental and supportive and wonderful people.
You start work then for a horse trainer, is that right?
I had a stint at Beaconsfield in a roadhouse, and I was not much good at retail. And then I started to work for Brian Courtney, who had a stud at Pakenham Upper, but he allowed me to go to his Caulfield stables, which, yeah, it was fabulous. And just sadly today, historically, Caulfield's just finished.
And then you go home and then you go to Western Australia. You work there for George Way, the scoundrel horse trainer, who's still a scoundrel horse trainer in Canada, I believe. You buy a cheap car at the age of 17 in Perth and you end up driving it back to Victoria.
Seemed like a good idea, Andrew.
It did. Now, when you get back, your mother tells you something which, although not important in itself, goes to the continuing story about the Good Samaritan home that you'd gone to. When you get back at 17, so this is 10 years after you were sexually assaulted, your mother says that that family, the Good Samaritans, and she names them, they've moved from the Bayside suburb out to South Gippsland. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you remembered this always because A, it had happened, and B, you were, curious about what had happened to them, I suppose.
And I was angry.
And you were angry. This goes to show, though, that both you and your mother were following that family's progress for a reason.
Yes.
It bolsters your story. So you stay angry. You're an angry teenager. At what stage did you talk to your mother about this as an adult, about what happened?
Right then, right at that point.
You're 17.
I thought that I was quite cool about it because I'd figured that it wasn't her fault and she'd tried hard to put up with me and help me progress in my life. I didn't think it was right to torture her. So I asked her at that point, I know that I was 17 when I asked her about what had transpired, and that was at that point that she told me that her and the mother had exchanged letters.
Right. How did she put it?
Sad. Mum was sad. Oh, she was very sad. Because after 5 boys, as one of them said, we actually prayed to get you. Please God, let the next baby be a girl.
It is a horrible thing. So that, again, goes to further proof that it all happened and that you made contemporary references to it or contemporaneous references to it with your mother over the years. You go to, I think, America to work with horses, do you?
Yeah, I flew to WA first, and Bart Cummings had, his foreman John O'Connor rang me up and asked me if I'd work while I was there, and I was on a holiday, and I told him that.
So this is where you meet the man you're going to marry?
Yes.
In Western
83.
Australia in 83, Bounty Hawk,
Yep.
I remember that year. And you marry Gary 2 years later in 1985. You had children?
That's correct.
You had, what, how many?
4.
You had 4 children. You brought them up at Miners Rest, and Gary was being a jockey, and you were working on the periphery of the racing industry as well, I imagine. And basically life went on, and all the while, all these years of what appears to be sort of normal family life, normal married life, you are nursing this secret. Now, it wasn't a secret from Gary. You had told Gary when you got married that you had to tell him something, and you told him that you'd been sexually assaulted as a little girl when you were 7. And he accepted that and said he was sorry for you, and that didn't make any difference, and away you went. Now, of course, it doesn't just vanish, does it? You nurse these things. They are sort of a thorn in your flesh for all those years. It doesn't quite heal over. But while your mother was still alive, you were very conscious of not wanting to make her sad or upset. You didn't want to hurt her feelings.
But not talking about it and dealing with it is like putting a band-aid on a boil. It's out of sight, but it just festers.
I see, and that's what happened. So you kept that Band-Aid on until after your mother died in 2008. And even then, because of you were very busy with kids and with all sorts of things that were happening in your life, you didn't really have time to draw breath and look back on what had happened to you, but it was always there looming over your shoulder. One day you decided to do something about a crime that had happened now, nearly 40 years earlier. Is that right?
Yes, and probably with the Royal Commission and the Catholic abuse coming out, especially in Ballarat being the epicentre, that made me, and I'm sort of glad I spoke up, because people that hadn't spoken up when the ribbons are being tied on the fence and all the stories are coming out, it made it worse for people who were suffering silently. So I think it was probably good health-wise that I did report.
You went along to the police and reported what had happened?
I went and purged.
You went to the police in Ballarat and told them?
Yes.
Okay.
I just sort of wanted to be rid of it.
And this is in 2014?
Yes. And when I came home, Gary said, where have you been? And you seem angry. And then he was upset because I hadn't consulted him before I went. So that just shows you the hurdles that immediately pop up the minute you decide.
Of course.
Apparently boys approach it, or men approach it, differently to women. Women are concerned about other people's feelings and how it affects them, whereas men decide they want to speak and they want justice. It's a completely different journey, man to woman.
So the police, go through the motions of some sort of investigation. They interview your big sister in WA, is that right, in Perth?
They only contacted her when they did no good, because I'd reported like a 7-year-old and I had the incorrect spelling.
Yeah, the family of the Good Samaritan, it's spelt one way but pronounced another, which is...
Yes, it can be quite a few different ways.
Not a problem. You'd given it to them spelt with 6 letters, and in fact it's got, 8 or whatever, but pronounced in a very similar way. And so the police, not being overly on the ball, had not considered that eventuality. You will have told them, of course, about the Tirana Boys Home guy, whose name you recalled as Eugene. Is that right? Eugene?
Yes.
Unusual name, very unusual name.
It's Greek for well-born, and I thank his mother for blessing him with an exotic name, otherwise...
You'd never have found him. So eventually, although it's a rare name, and although this guy is, as it turns out, he's an Aboriginal lad, and so he should have been reasonably easy to track down if the police had had a red-hot go, but
I believe so.
They had a lot of other things to do, and they didn't find... It wasn't on top of their to-do list, and they didn't make much progress in what was, a 40-year-old rape claim by a woman who is now in her late 40s, and it had happened to her when she was 7. No surprises that it was a headache for all concerned, because I guess some potential contemporary witnesses were dead. Others were probably faded memories, demented or similar. The older people, that is. And the 3 people who knew most about it, of course, were the 3 youths, and they had the most to lose and therefore were least likely to help. Is that right?
I'd say so. And the parents were all dead. They didn't have dementia, and if they were alive, I wouldn't have put it through them anyway. I wouldn't have thought that'd be a classy action. This is now between grown-ups that were once children, like...
Yeah, true. You're absolutely right. But of course, contemporary knowledge of any events would be useful, I imagine. If honest people were questioned
Yes.
by police or by lawyers, they'd probably give fairly honest answers, and that might have been useful in an investigation. But of course, those questions were never put, and those people were dead before they could be put to them. Such as, Mrs. Good Samaritan could have answered a lot of questions, no doubt.
And I didn't want to be bitter and cause trouble. Like, I just wanted to sort of address it.
Yeah. What did you want? You wanted to have it acknowledged. You can't be unraped. You can't wind the clock back. You really want people to say,
just be treated with respect, Andrew.
Yeah, this happened.
One person, like my brother said, if Mum had have acted, his life could have been destroyed, his future could have been destroyed before he'd struck a blow, but Mum wasn't like that. He should have been grateful that, we behaved in a Christian-like manner. We all make mistakes when we're young. Like, I've made plenty of mistakes. You've just got to own them.
That's true. So where do we go from that stage in 2014? The police go through the motions of a criminal investigation, but of course their big problem is there are no witnesses except a middle-aged woman who's got a story to tell about what happened when she was 7, and a lot of the memories are in fact cloudy or been blanked out of her mind or suppressed by her instinct for self-preservation. And so the police have a very unenviable task of trying to unravel this historic rape allegation.
Well, all that stuff is put into the too hard basket until you get the frogs jumping out of the pan, and there's so many of them, either from one perpetrator or from institutions where there's action, and that's the same worldwide. So you just don't take it personally.
So what happened next in your case?
Well, when the police rang me and told me that they'd found the main one, not Eugene, and I had the two youngest children in the car with me, and at that point I hadn't told any of the children what had happened.
Yeah.
And I couldn't...
What year was this, do you think?
Probably 2015, I'd say.
Yep, okay.
And I had a stupid thought come through my head, and it was almost like a sigh of relief, and thought, oh, thank heavens that's over. But how ridiculous in hindsight.
Yeah.
Because then they proceeded to tell me that he denied the existence of myself or Eugene. And I was angry, instantly angry. I thought, well...
When the police went to the Good Samaritan, the older brother of the Samaritans, the bad Samaritan, let's call him, the bad Samaritan says, no, don't know what you're talking about. He denies it.
He lawyered up.
He lawyered up. Now, let's not get too detailed, but by this stage, this fellow, he is 7 years older than you. So by the time the police get to him, he's in his mid-50s at least. He's a very successful person, isn't he? Mm-hmm. He's not Kerry Packer, but he's a very successful person in his own field. He's made enough money out of business that he has become quite a well-known racehorse owner and quite a prominent figure in the thoroughbred game or industry. And he supports that through his various business interests. He had gone to school at one of the more prominent private boys' schools in Melbourne, and he was supported by that sort of old boy network, including his favourite lawyer. What happens next?
I Googled him too, the police, when they said they'd identified him, and he denied that I existed or anything of my story was correct. So I asked the police to clarify the person that I found online, and they wouldn't. So I just announced I was going to go and see him myself, and they told me that I couldn't do that and that they weren't my private investigators. And I just said, well, I'm a grown-up. Who's going to stop me? He's got a public place. So I proceeded to the public place. I mentioned to my family, did anyone want to have a picnic on the Sunday? And about 25 to 30 of us met there. I obviously had a hidden agenda, which I didn't disclose to them at that point.
Right.
You had to pay to go in, and when we got to the gate, I had made some exploratory phone calls beforehand, and when my husband stopped and pulled out his wallet, I just leaned over and said to the person on the gate, I know the owner intimately, and we were ushered in. Yep. So I wouldn't have paid, not 1 cent.
No.
And luckily he wasn't there, because there could have been a physical confrontation. But I left a bit of paperwork there for him.
Yeah.
And my mobile number. My husband said, don't make any accusations, which I didn't. I'd made those accusations through following due process, which is reporting to the police.
Right.
And I thought, well, if it's not the correct person, he's going to be bemused and just put this in the bin. But his lawyer contacted me and arranged a meeting. Okay.
Now, this first meeting is a private meeting arranged by his lawyer at his lawyer's office in inner suburban Melbourne.
That's correct.
And what happened at that meeting? Who was there?
Just the three of us. I should have asked the lawyer to leave the room. In hindsight, that wasn't a good thing. I mean, naturally, you'd lawyer up if you're going to defend something and defend yourself.
You went there alone?
I did. The police knew that I was going. My husband and my sister knew that I was going, and a prominent Maryknoll woman who was still alive, one of the original families who's supported me. So,
what did you hope to achieve at that meeting by going there alone against a tough, successful, rich businessman and his tough, successful, rich lawyer? What did you think you were going to do?
Confront them.
And say what? What did you say?
Well, I just said to them, you don't have to admit anything to me because I was there.
Yep.
Like, if you can imagine having a loop in your head that you can't make go away and it's been there for 40 years.
Yep.
Confronting these people that have hurt you so deeply and acted in a criminal manner. Like, I'm not a blow-up doll. I'm a person with a memory and feelings and grievances and...
Yeah. So your purpose really was to get it off your liver.
Absolutely. And offer weasel clauses. Like, at that point, Andrew, I didn't want anybody to know. I still didn't want anybody to know. Like, I had as much vested interest in, like, you're brought up in a little Catholic town.
Yeah, I get it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is what happened. Now, how did that meeting unfold? How did it start and end, or how did it end?
It was very civil, and I found it very interesting because he was telling me things that I didn't know, like my sister's address book. Obviously, in the old days, it was, just the father's first name, and he was clarifying things like that, which I didn't 100% know when I went into the meeting. So I found it really fascinating, and I found it fascinating to not be a powerless child. Bullies don't bother me, don't frighten me at all. They ended up threatening me, which...
So how did that happen? How did it degenerate?
He leaned over the table and got in my face and said, "Do you know who I am?" And that had no meaning to me whatsoever. Yes, I know who you are now because you've been telling me. You are definitely the man who raped me when I was a little girl.
And what did he or the lawyer say to that?
I told him what I thought, that yes, I know exactly who you are now. And it was at that point that he said to me, "I know David Hayes," like trying to impress me, and I just felt a huge wave of relief wash over me.
When he said that, he was referring to David Hayes, the very prominent horse trainer, one of the bigger horse trainers probably in the world at that stage, and the son and heir of Colin Hayes that you used to work for. That's what he meant.
That's what he meant.
He knew that you'd work for them, I presume.
I don't think at that point he did. I don't think they'd
Why
bothered
would he
to
bring
check
it up? It seems a strange thing to say.
Well, if we're in racing, he's established, maybe through just me being... Maybe
So
he
the
didn't
fact
know
that
that I was...
he knows that you're Gary Murphy's wife, you're in racing, therefore you're going to be impressed by him knowing the very big trainer.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just thought it was pretty amusing myself. I mean, I didn't think it was an ace card.
No, of course not. So he says this, "I know David Hayes," and sort of waves his phone around. What did you say?
I said, "Let's ring him." Good, let's ring him. And he got really angry and picked up his phone. He said to me, "You ring him," and I knew that I wouldn't have had David's number on my phone. So I said to him, "You ring him and I'll talk to him." And he picked up his phone and stormed out of the room.
Okay. And what happened with the lawyer who was...
Well, we both stood up and the lawyer stood over me. He was bigger than me and stronger than me and older than me and more powerful than me, and I'm on his home turf. And he said, "We're going to break you. We're going to drag you all the way to the Supreme Court." And I was fine with that. Didn't have a problem with that at all.
Right.
Go there tomorrow.
And so what happened next?
Well, then he stormed out of the room too, and I rang David Hayes.
So where did you ring David? You went outside to your car, or?
No, I didn't leave the building.
Oh, you stayed in their office?
I was in their boardroom.
They left their boardroom?
Yes.
And left you alone in there?
Yes.
So you rang David Hayes, to what end?
Well, I asked David if he ran into this person on a racecourse, would he vouch for me? And he obviously wanted to know why, and I told him I couldn't tell him. And he was bemused and puzzled. We talked for 20 minutes. I have a record of the call.
Right. And he said he would vouch for you?
Oh, of course he would.
Well, I suppose he would say that, wouldn't he?
Well, I wouldn't ask him if I didn't think he'd vouch for me.
Vouch for you in the sense of what? That you're not mad and that you do exist and you're not...
Of good character. I mean, they knew I was a good character, Andrew.
What happens next in your escalating tensions between you and the bad Samaritan? What happens there?
Well, I didn't realise that the Royal Commission, the wind-up of it was that they'd recommended to the government that they change the statute of limitations laws. I had no idea of any of that. I just thought, well, I'm just going to start legal action against him. And
Right.
it took a bit of time to organise, but a letter of demand was sent.
Civil action. You wanted to sue.
Yeah, like I just thought, if the police aren't going to do anything and the criminal's beyond reasonable doubt, and there's no point in anyone going to jail, like that's just stupid.
Well,
That's
no one was going
ridiculous.
to go to jail over this.
No, no one was ever going to go to jail.
No.
And I have no control over what the police do, so what can I do that I've got control over?
Yeah.
So I didn't know about all the established child sex abuse lawyers that work exclusively in this field. So I was, we didn't used to get the paper. I wasn't particularly following the Royal Commission. I was still a very busy person every day, which kept me sane. It's when you're not busy and these things play on your mind that you start to go, I need to fix this.
Yeah, you're right.
I need this to be acknowledged and addressed, dealt with. So a letter of demand was sent to him.
And demanding a sum of money to.
Well, yes, I imagine so. Like at that point, the police nor myself had spoken to my brothers. I didn't have my school reports.
Yep.
It was very early stages. I just wanted the whole thing to end, to have some sort of resolution and move on with my life.
Right. So the letter of demand, what was its intent?
Acknowledgement.
Acknowledgement. Okay. What happened then? What was his response?
An angry denial and lawyering up.
You issued a writ, which roughly said what?
I'll meet you in court.
You were suing for damages, for, mental impairment,
And
whatever.
to my mother and to my children. Like none of my children had ever been I never outsourced any parenting. No daycare, no sleepovers, no school camps.
Okay. Because you were so affected by what had happened to you that with your own 4 children, you just never, ever let them out of your sight
No.
overnight.
No.
Yeah, that makes sense.
After I reported to the police, child number 3 went on a school camp to Germany. Well, how do you
Right.
explain to the others you never got to go to Creswick Christian camp up the road because...
Yeah. So what was the result of your attempt to get a reaction from him legally?
Well, the court ordered mediation, which I was happy to do.
Yep.
And I was aware, if people have a good name or goodwill,
Yes.
that you don't want to destroy it. I was as keen at this point as him to just have some resolution and people not know. This bitterness is an unproductive. I wanted productive outcome, like recognising that I had no education when my mother taught HSC at 21 was a bitter pill to swallow.
True.
Like I was-
It had smashed your education to pieces.
Absolutely.
It really did derail the trajectory of your life.
Absolutely.
I think it's worth telling your listeners that when this happened, when you were 7, your oldest brother, whose name could be Bernard perhaps, was studying engineering at Newman College at Melbourne University. So your family were sort of well-educated high achievers who respected education and hard work and achievement, but that promise was basically trashed in your case because of what had happened to you. It's a fair
They put
assumption.
me in the
isn't it?
gutter at 7.
They put you in the gutter at 7. Now, so all your anger about that was directed now at this man that you'd identified beyond all doubt as one of the 2 teenagers who had raped you.
Beyond a
And-
shadow of a doubt.
So what happened next with your fight?
Um,
Your attempt
well,
to
my
fight it
lawyer
legally?
said to me, the court's ordered mediation and they frown upon anyone that refuses to mediate. And I was happy to mediate, more than happy to mediate. He had the money to appeal, so he appealed to the county court to get it thrown out, and a woman judge ruled that we go to trial. I mean, I'm in completely unknown territory here, Andrew. Like, I've never had any legal... and so he wasn't happy with that, so he appealed to the Court of Appeals because he could afford to get it thrown out and to get his identity hidden, and I couldn't afford to fight both and lose both. At this point, I'm totally on my own. And I thought, well, this is going to cost me in excess of a six-figure amount if I lose, but I'll just fight to get him into court to be heard.
And so...
And I lost.
You lost in the sense that everyone walks away, but you walk away with his costs as well as your own.
Yep.
Which is, of course, what happens. Otherwise, we'd all be taking each other to court. We have to be frightened of the costs so that we don't take people to court lightly, I imagine. And this does happen. It's very upsetting. You get lumbered with massive costs, which are often, you'd think, inflated. You were hit, I think, with a bill for about $120,000.
That's
right?
Correct, for not being heard.
What was your reaction to that? Now, some of us might have said, "Well, you can whistle for it." What was your reaction?
Well, I had an obligation to pay it, but he didn't have an obligation to take my money.
Were you in a legal position of co-owning property that you could have been sold up or something?
Well, I had done that as a stay-at-home mum. I'd bought land and built units, so I had to pay one of my units that I'd paid off with the rent as a stay-at-home mum. So we don't have the asset and we don't have the income anymore, and the financials of that were just awful.
So what's the bottom line here? You do what?
I took unsolicited advice from other people, including my sister, who said, "Don't pay, he won't sue you for the money, he just wants you to be quiet." Being quiet is not my style. Fulfilling my obligations is my style.
That's how you felt then. At the time you thought, I'll be defiant, I'll be tough, I'll make a stand. And what did you do?
I sent him a personal cheque from Gary and Marita Murphy for over $100,000 and with some urging he cashed it. He didn't have to. He could have ripped it up and paid his lawyer. So then I went looking for Eugene. Took the police 1.5 years to find him. It took me about 10 minutes, Andrew.
Yes, that's right. It wouldn't be that hard looking for someone called Eugene. Your motive there was to find basically the only other witness. Well, when I say another witness, a co-offender and probably the lead offender, if it's the truth's known. But you thought, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. If I can befriend Eugene and he might be able to help me make a case against the bad Samaritan, as we're calling him. And you went to Collingwood, I think, in inner suburban Melbourne. You found this guy working the streets in his mobility scooter, where, not to put too fine a point on it, he was probably selling drugs outside the supermarket in Smith Street, I think, which is a fairly well-known haunt. You went up and introduced yourself. And I think you did this on... The first time you didn't do it on film, but the second time you did do it on film. Is that right?
Well, I asked the media to come with me because I felt like he'd talk and he was ready to talk, but nobody would, so I just funded it and did it myself.
So what you did, having established contact with Eugene, you employed your own documentary maker, quite a skilled filmmaker, who shot lots of footage of you and Gary and various people, and your great friend and supporter, Ingrid Irwin, who's both a lawyer and a survivor herself. And you had a camera in the car filming as you drove down Smith Street looking to talk to Eugene again. And your encounter with Eugene, your second encounter with Eugene, was actually filmed. And he said, "Come around the corner and talk to me." And you did, and you introduced him to the camera person or camera crew, and they filmed your interaction with him. The net result of that, tell me if I'm wrong here, was that Eugene Lovett, as his name, he confirmed what had happened. He admitted that he was present, that he was one of the offenders, and he said he would help you by swearing up to that fact in order that you be able to launch proceedings against the other offender, the guy we're calling the bad Samaritan. Is that right?
Not really, because I could not do anything else with that guy other than appeal to the government of the bind and the situation that I found myself in. And obviously Eugene was in a bind and a situation too, because he was torn between wanting to help me and protect himself. But the better half of him came to the fore and the front. So I just thought that it was meritable to me. Ingrid did not come on board until I actually got ready to edit and produce. So all the other filming had been sitting there, and I found while I was busy, if we had a horse in work and I was really busy, I was sort of thinking about what I'd do and how I'd do it, and I knew I needed $5,000 to edit and produce the documentary.
Right.
And I found a wealthy, successful businessman who's overspilled into racing that stepped up to become that person.
Somebody funded you $5,000 to help make the documentary, and you made it, and you employed.
And I didn't want charity. I told him I'd toss him double or nothing if I get my money back. That I'd give him $10,000.
Right. Good.
I don't want charity.
No, of course not. But the net result is you've got this very powerful. It's a basic, simple documentary, but it's very powerful and quite moving and quite graphic. And what have you done with it?
Well, it was released in COVID in Showcase Cinema 1 at the Region in Ballarat in May. Some of the support that I've had has been amazing, and some that I've had has been absolutely appalling.
In what ways has it been appalling? Who criticised you for it?
Well, people close to me that made police statements and that are not interested in the end result. Their support has fallen away as they tired on my journey.
Oh, I see. So this has been very wearing on some of the people closest to you because...
Well, as Ingrid says, that's very standard. We see it all the time. There's a pattern, there's a pattern, there's a pattern. So you don't take it personally, Andrew.
No, but since 2014, it's been pretty hard on, those
yes,
closest to you. Okay.
Financially, mentally, physically, marital...
Everything. Dropping 100,000 is never much good for anybody's peace of mind.
As Gary said, I could have bought a yearling with that. He was serious. He wasn't joking.
I know. Well, there you are. That's the punter's mentality. That's what keeps racing going. What this documentary has done, and tell us its title again.
You Be the Judge, the Marita Murphy story.
And you've used it as a tool to send out to all sorts of people and all sorts of media outlets. Anybody you think might be interested or might be appalled and seeing it. It's aroused quite a reaction.
Oh, worldwide. And I don't think it's a good look for, I call it the Victorian state. I'm a fan of faction and not fiction. I like autobiographies. I like biographies. I like Australian story. I like that. That's what I like. I like the human interest and I like the history part. So I guess I pandered to myself in some ways. I'm already planning to do a racing stories documentary now because I have a lot of rich history that I don't want to be wasted. So it was an indulgence of self.
But you felt that it was part, for the sake of a little bit more money, it gave you a lot of bang for your buck.
I think so.
You've got publicity. I mean, we're doing this podcast and writing stories in the Herald Sun basically because you had the nous and the gumption and the nerve to pull together this documentary.
My story, my life.
Your story. So in closing, I think probably your message is, if you haven't seen this, to have a look at it. Listeners, we'll put a link to the documentary in the description of this episode.
And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Stuart Grimley, the member for Torquay, who was kind enough to indulge me in a meeting at Spring Street at Parliament pre-COVID, probably 4 or 5 years ago. And he actually put it online on my behalf, which I'm really grateful for because as a victim, I'd rather be an advocate and I'd rather advocate for others than myself.
Yeah. No, good on you. And you do a good job of it. And you've stuck at it and you've really probably turned a sort of financial defeat into a moral victory. And I think if you can do that, you're ahead of the game. As they say in punting terms, and you know this better than most, lose money, lose nothing, lose confidence, lose everything. Is that right?
Everything.
Thanks for listening. Life and Crimes is a Sunday Herald Sun production for True Crime Australia. Our producer is John Burton. And if you want to know more about these stories, links are in the description of this episode.